Welcome back to Dining with Diabetes, Session 2, Carbohydrates and Sweeteners. Today we will focus on carbs and sweeteners in our diets. These are at the heart of learning to adopt healthy eating patterns when you have diabetes. But before we begin, let's reflect on any changes you might have made over the last week. As a result of the last lesson, were you more aware of diabetes management techniques or tests? Did you begin to think about what you were eating and why? You each set a small SMART goal for this week. Were you able to work on it? How did you do? Was it a reasonable short-term goal? We also talked about 3 important items that we need to balance to manage our diabetes. Can anyone name them? They are medications, meals, and physical activity. Remember, try not to be overwhelmed with changing all 3 at one time. Perhaps just focus on one topic at a time, and once you feel more confident, then you can move on to the next item. Medications may be out of your control, but meals and physical activity definitely aren't. Additionally, we talked about physical tests that can help you better manage your diabetes. Can you name a few? Hemoglobin A1C is a test that you should receive every 3 to 4 months. Your blood pressure test should be done during every doctor's visit. Your cholesterol, LDL, HDL, and triglyceride blood test should be done once a year. Your GFR, which is your kidney function test, should be done once a year. You should also have an eye exam every year if you have type 2 diabetes. You should do foot exams daily and get one during each of your doctor's visits. It's also important that you do your home glucose testing as advised by your doctor. As we are surrounded by choices every single day, some of these choices are more calorie-dense foods, such as donuts, sweets, and French fries, and others are more nutrient-dense, fruits, whole grains, vegetables. All of these choices add up and make an impact on our blood sugars. Today we're going to focus on carbohydrates and learn how to make the best choices to balance your blood sugar. You have no doubt heard the word carbohydrate a lot since learning that you have diabetes, but you may not have been told what they are or why they are important. Basically, carbohydrates are broken down to glucose during digestion and absorbed into the bloodstream. When someone has diabetes, their body does not use blood glucose the way that it should. You can help your body use glucose better by having consistent amount of carbohydrate-containing foods at regular intervals. Your healthcare team can help you determine how many servings you need per day and the timing of those servings. Throughout this session, we will talk about carbohydrate servings. 1 carbohydrate serving is equal to 15 grams of carbohydrate. Food groups containing carbs are grains, fruit, starchy vegetables, and milk and yogurt products. Keep in mind that both starchy and sweet foods are rich in carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are an essential nutrient, but too many of them, whether they're starchy or sweet, can cause hyperglycemia or high blood sugars and damage your body. Just as a car needs gas to run, blood glucose or blood sugar is the fuel that our bodies run on. Glucose or blood sugar is vital to life itself. Our bodies can make glucose from all the foods that we eat, but some foods are better sources of glucose than others. Can you name some foods that raise blood sugars? Bread, fruit juice, desserts, sweet beverages. Actually, all carbohydrates raise blood glucose following a meal or snack. So how do we balance all of this? The USDA created a guide to help us choose healthy food. It was introduced in 2010 and contains all the food groups that we need to eat each day. This food guide is called MyPlate and has a wonderful website called choosemyplate.gov with a wide array of resources. You may have seen MyPlate on food packaging and in the media. For our purposes, we are going to use another tool known as the Idaho Plate Method, which was designed to assist in diabetic meal planning. This plate differs from MyPlate because half of the plate is full of veggies and the fruit is outside of the plate. You may be saying to yourself, how can I eat that many vegetables? We know this is a big change, but let's talk about it. What might be some examples of how we can fill half of our plate with vegetables? We could do a mixed green salad, spaghetti squash. We can use that instead of our regular spaghetti. Or we can pick our favorite non-starchy veggie, like a quarter of the plate in broccoli and the other quarter of the plate in carrots. Filling half of your plate with vegetables can also lower the caloric content of your meal and may lead to weight loss. Using the plate method, no more than a fourth of the plate should be covered by starchy foods, such as bread, grains, or potatoes. For heart-healthy eating, no more than 1/4 of the plate should be covered by something from the meat group. The small circles represent single servings of milk and fruit. Since milk, fruit, and starches raise blood sugar in the same way, they can be exchanged sometimes to match your taste and nutrition needs. All three provide about the same amount of carbohydrates per serving, which is 15 grams. When we talk about carbohydrates in diabetic meal planning, we often talk about carbohydrate servings. As mentioned earlier, a carbohydrate serving is 15 grams. Carbohydrate servings include starchy foods like grains and starchy vegetables, dairy, non-starchy vegetables, fruit, and desserts. One serving of a starchy food is 1 slice of bread, or half of a bun or bagel. If the starchy food is cooked, like rice, potatoes, pasta, corn, or green peas, then one serving is 1/3 to 1/2 cup. It is also approximately the amount a person can hold in one cupped hand. A serving of fruit is one small piece of fresh fruit or half of a cup of canned or frozen fruit or fruit juice, which is 4 ounces. 1 8-ounce cup of milk is one serving. If the milk is made into pudding or a frozen dessert, the serving is half of a cup. Each of these serving sizes of starch, fruit, and milk raise blood sugar about the same amount. I encourage you to get some cereal and take 2 cereal bowls and pour what you think is a 1-cup serving into the bowl. Then measure what you have poured into an actual measuring cup to see if your eyeballed estimate was correct. You might be surprised to find out your portion sizes are way too big. Other serving size visuals include 4 stacked dice equals 1 ounce of cheese. A deck of cards equals 3 ounces of meat. A baseball equals a medium-sized potato or piece of fruit, or 1 cup of cereal. A CD equals a pancake. So why does this even matter? Just remember that large portions add up quickly. 100 extra calories per day can equal 10 pounds of weight gain in 1 year. Meal planning is important for diabetes, but it takes time. It is very important to separate starchy vegetables from non-starchy vegetables. Starchy vegetables such as corn, peas, lima beans, and potatoes should be included in the starchy quarter of your plate. Remember that starchy vegetables are high in carbohydrate and will raise your blood glucose level. Non-starchy vegetables such as broccoli, tomatoes, spinach, and cucumber are a great choice because they help fill you up, but do not have as great of an impact on your blood glucose levels. So fill half of your plate with non-starchy vegetables. Please notice that while non-starchy vegetables are an excellent source of many nutrients and fiber, they are not a completely free food. Since they do contain a very small amount of carbs, up to 5 grams of carbohydrate per serving, large portions or a triple portion can still affect that blood glucose level. So if you have half of your plate filled with non-starchy vegetables, this section has essentially 0 grams of carbohydrates. Foods in the grain groups are high in carbohydrate, so be mindful of the serving size and learn what a serving of carbohydrate is. Carbohydrates add up quickly. A serving of grains has roughly 15 grams of carbohydrates. These may include breads, cereals, pasta, starchy vegetables, beans, and rice. Examples include 1 slice of bread, half a cup cooked cereal, 3/4 cup of dry cereal, a half a cup cooked beans, a third a cup cooked pasta or rice, a half a cup starchy vegetables, which include corn, peas, lima beans, and potatoes. Those are just some examples. While desserts should not take the place of healthy foods, it is important to note that they should be included in this portion of the plate as well. Desserts should not be looked at as a separate category, but carefully considered with a balanced meal plan. Talk with your healthcare team to determine the number of carbs servings you need. A general recommendation would include 45 to 60 grams of carbs per meal for women, which is 3 to 4 carb servings, and 60 to 75 grams of carbs per meal for men, which is 4 to 5 carb servings. Protein is a very important part to any diet. 1/4 of the plate is equivalent to approximately 3 ounces of meat equivalents, roughly the size of a deck of cards or a computer mouse. Other examples include half a cup of dried beans, peas, or tofu, 2 eggs, 2 ounces of cheese, 1/4 a cup of cottage cheese, or 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. The protein section of your plate has 0 grams of carbohydrates. Beans and peas count as 1 protein plus 1 starch. Equivalents include half a cup of cooked beans, such as black, kidney, pinto, or white beans, refried beans. A half a cup of cooked peas, such as chickpeas, cowpeas, lentils, or split peas, or 1/3 a cup of baked beans. Remember that cheese is considered a protein food for purposes of diabetic meal planning. Equivalents include 1 ounce of cheese, 1/4 a cup of cottage cheese. Low-fat choices, those with 3 grams of fat or less per ounce, are encouraged. Sometimes people will ask if they can still have fruit. Of course you can still have fruit. It's good for you, has vitamins and minerals, but fruit does contain carbohydrates or natural sugar. You may choose fresh fruit, fruit canned in its own juice, or dried fruit. Whole fruit is preferred over juices, but 100% fruit juice may be used in the diet. So here's some examples of some half-cup equivalents. Remember, a serving or a half of a cup is 15 grams of carbohydrate. So a small piece of fresh fruit, a half a cup cut up fresh fruit, a half a cup of canned fruit, canned in its own juice, 1/4 a cup of dried fruit, a half a cup of 100% fruit juice. As carb levels vary widely among different fruit, one thing you could do is look at calorieking.com, and it will give you, if you go to the website, you put in the name of the fruit, it'll pull up a full nutrition label for that fruit. That's a really great place to get some updated information. Again, that's calorieking.com. Did you know that milk and yogurt contain carbohydrates as well? Again, you need to add these into your total carbohydrate intake for your meal. So fat-free and low-fat are good choices because they contain fewer calories and are lower in saturated fat. They contain the same amount of other vitamins and minerals as milk with higher fat content and the same amount of carbohydrates. So if you'll notice, an 8-ounce serving of milk or 1 cup of plain yogurt is a serving of carbohydrate, which is 15 grams of carbs. One thing to keep in mind if you're going to get yogurt that is maybe whipped or contains fruit, you want to check the nutrition label because they tend to have higher carbohydrate levels per serving. Another thing to notice is that cheese is counted as a protein since it has a little carbohydrate and is a good source of protein. If you are carbohydrate counting as a meal planning method, or if you just want to know how many carbs are in your food, you need to be able to read the nutrition facts label. This is a picture of a nutrition label found on almost all packaged foods sold in this country. Look at the portion of the label that tells how much total carbohydrate is in the food in order to decide how much it will raise your blood glucose. The total carbohydrate is the sum of the fiber, sugar, and starch in the food. However, only sugar and starch break down to glucose and can affect your blood glucose. Be sure to check the serving size on this label and see if it is close to the amount you ate. If you ate more, you must include the extra carbohydrates in your meal count. A serving of this macaroni and cheese has 31 grams of total carbohydrate and does not have any fiber. It has 5 grams of sugar, so the other 26 grams are starch. How many carbohydrate servings is this? The answer is 2, because 1 serving of carbohydrate has 15 grams. Be sure to look at a total carbohydrate and not just at sugars to see if it will raise your blood sugar. Here are some common artificial sweeteners you might see on the shelf at your local grocery store. Aspartame, also known as NutraSweet or Equal, has very little aftertaste, but it tends to denature or lose its sweet taste when it is heated. It is 200 times sweeter than sugar. Saccharin, sold as Sweet and Low and as a brown sugar substitute, Sugar Twin and Sweet Thing are very stable for baking, but it has noticeable aftertaste when used in large quantities. It is 300 times sweeter than sugar. Acesulfame potassium, sold as Sweet One, has less aftertaste than saccharin and is more stable when heated than aspartame. It is 200 times sweeter than table sugar. Sucralose, also known as Splenda, is made from sugar with certain chemical changes. It has the same volume and taste as sugar, and it is stable when heated. Brown sugar blends are also available. It is 600 times sweeter than table sugar. Stevia may be sold under the approved names of Only Sweet, Pure Via, Sweet Leaf, and Truvia. It is stable for baking. Check packaging as may vary from one brand to another and depending upon form, such as liquid, packet, or loose powder. Generally, substitute 1/4 teaspoon or 1/2 packet of stevia for every 1 teaspoon in a recipe. It is 200 times sweeter than sugar. Sugar alcohols, another type of reduced calorie sweetener. When compared to sugar, sugar alcohols have less calories. It's similar in bulk and texture, but it may have a laxative effect. Traditional home recipes for desserts may contain large portions of sugar. Sugar does more than just make a recipe sweet. Sugar helps a recipe to be tender and moist. It also helps make the familiar golden brown color of baked desserts and breads. Sometimes sugar makes up a lot of the volume of a recipe, as it does in cakes and cookies. When it does, replacing sugar entirely with artificial sweeteners may produce a cake that is tough, flat, and dry, as well as gray in color. Remember that artificial sweeteners only make a recipe sweet. Recipes which usually do well with sugar substitutes include beverages, frozen desserts, pie fillings, sauces, gelatins, and puddings. Cakes, cookies, and meringues depend on large amounts of sugar for more of their finished properties. You should not replace more than 1/2 cup of the total amount of sugar with an artificial sweetener in these recipes. Checking the official website for a particular artificial sweetener can be a good source of recipes and ideas because the manufacturer has tested the recipes for acceptability. You can usually reduce the amount of sugar and fat by 1/3 to 1/4 in cookies, quick breads, and pies without affecting the product. This may not work well with cakes. You should not replace more than half a cup of the total amount of sugar with an artificial sweetener. Artificial sweeteners need to be used in small amounts at first and increased only gradually to avoid an overly sweet taste or unpleasant aftertaste. When two different classes of artificial sweeteners are combined, such as saccharin with aspartame or acesulfame potassium with aspartame, the result is a much sweeter taste than it is when one kind is used alone in cooking. If a recipe calls for 6 packages of saccharin sweetener, for instance, try using a total of only 3 packages of sweetener, but use 2 different kinds, such as 1 package of saccharin and 2 packages of aspartame. Some sweeteners work better in cold items, and some are acceptable in heated items. For example, we know aspartame loses its sweet taste when exposed to high heat in baking. When combined with another sweetener or acid, it becomes more stable. Aspartame may also be added to a product after it has been baked. Sucralose, on the other hand, is more frequently used in baked items because it is more stable and does not lose its sweet taste. Many people use fruit purees and fruit juices to replace fat in recipes. These products may not be any lower in carbohydrate than any sugar they replace. However, they do help with moisture and volume. Be sure to read the label on fruit purees and on fat-free baking products to see how much carbohydrate they add to the recipe. There is usually a trade-off with these types of food. Fat-free items may be higher in sugar and contain more carbohydrates. As you are responsible for your health, you need to make sure to keep a balance with your diet and physical activity and any medications you are taking. Remember that moderate weight loss can make a big difference in your blood glucose control. Additionally, when your muscles are active, your body uses glucose more effectively. The physical activity guidelines for Americans state all adults should avoid inactivity. Some exercise is better than none. For substantial benefits, adults should get 150 minutes of physical activity per week. This translates to at least 30 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity above usual activity at work or home on most days of the week. Increased activity will reap even greater benefits. This daily exercise can be cumulative. It may be done during one 30-minute session or several shorter sessions throughout the day. The important thing is to be physically active on a regular basis. One thing I would encourage, always check with your healthcare provider before making changes to your diet or exercise routines. I know physical activity can be difficult. It can be intimidating. It can be something that we avoid, we put off. One thing I really encourage people to do is make a plan. So we always put doctor's appointments and different appointments we have into a calendar. The one thing I would encourage you is open up your calendar and pick maybe one day a week, maybe 2 days a week. Look through it and determine if you have 15 minutes. So let's say every Tuesday and Thursday, I decide from 4 to 4:15, I have time to go on a walk. Maybe I like to garden. Maybe I like to walk my dog. Put it in your calendar. That way, when you start the week, you know that you have physical activity planned. It may seem silly, but it's easier to show up for ourselves that way than just to say, I'm going to work out at some point this week. Another thing you can do is if you watch an hour of TV a day, get up at the commercials and walk in place. Maybe lift some weights, maybe do some jumping jacks, some sit-ups, something to get yourself active. At the end of that hour, you will have probably a good 20 minutes of physical activity completed. But think of little ways that you can get activity into your day. Now it's time to decide what our SMART step for this coming week will be. Thinking about what we've talked about, what is one thing you can change to take better control of your diabetes? Here are some tips for how to set a SMART step. Make it specific. Detail exactly what you want to do. Make it measurable. Your goal should be something that you can measure to see if you've accomplished it or not. Make it attainable. Don't set yourself up for failure. Make your goal something that you can actually accomplish. Make it relevant. Your goals should be related to what it is that you are trying to accomplish. Make it timely. The goal that you set should be time-bound, meaning that you should give yourself a specific amount of time to accomplish it. Here are a couple examples. I will log my blood sugars before each meal and 2 hours after meals on one weekday and one weekend day within the next week to evaluate my blood sugar control and determine areas for improvement. I will do a foot exam every evening before I go to bed for the next week. Well, that concludes the end of today's class. I hope that this information was valuable to you. Sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming because there's so much information. So I encourage you to think about the things that we talked about, really work on the SMART goal that you set. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to call me at 316-660-0118 or email me at sarasawer@ksu.edu. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you.